Thank you, Elena. That was a great overview of all that's going on. Just the tip of the iceberg. Oh, thank you, Philip. The Division of Housing, we are a part of the executive branch in the Department of Local Affairs. And we are comprised of 4 offices in a team. Those offices are the Office of Housing Finance and Sustainability. So that's where we make our grants and our loans to build, to rehabilitate housing. And you can see that last fiscal year, we created, with all of our partners, of course, more than 5,000 affordable housing opportunities, new opportunities for folks to live affordably. With our Office of Rental Assistance, that's where we're the Statewide Housing Authority, and we manage over 8,000 vouchers with our local partners that administer those vouchers in our local communities. And 83% of the folks that we serve are people with disabilities through those voucher programs. With our Office of Regulatory Oversight, that's where we inspect the installation and the construction of manufactured housing. And you can see that we inspected almost 800 installations of manufactured housing throughout the state. This is also where House Bill 1309 created the mobile home park oversight. And so that's something that I'll address here in a few minutes. And then we have the Office of Homeless Initiatives. And you can see from last year, we housed 1,600 people from homelessness. But of course, as COVID has impacted all of us, it has impacted our folks unhoused throughout the state significantly. So I'll also be talking about that. Philip, can you move to the next slide? So based on this work, I should also mention our community access team, where we are providing housing for people with disabilities. And then also home modifications to help people stay in their homes in an accessible space. So that is another team that we have within the Division of Housing. But it's based on this work that you can see there's been tremendous support in providing more opportunity through funding to serve more people throughout Colorado. And so based on legislation in 2019, these are the funds that we projected. So the baseline are those general funds. And you can see that that is holding steady at $9.2 million through projections. And then the marijuana tax cash fund is $15.3 million on an annual basis. And then the vendor fee is that gray. And so this is something that I'll be talking a little bit more about here. And then the yellow is the unclaimed assets. And so that was anticipated to be $30 million for 3 years. Next slide, please. So then we had the pandemic. And it has impacted us in so many ways throughout Colorado and throughout the country and the world. And one of those is our economy. And so the vendor fee is really based on the collection of sales tax. And so because sales tax, not as many people are buying things, it has a tremendous impact on the collection of vendor fee. And so because the housing funds were coming in last based on the distribution of sales tax and vendor fee, there were actually no funds distributed in state fiscal year 20. So that ended June 30th of this year. And so no vendor fee was actually transferred. And so really the payout of potential $8 million in this fiscal year 21, is really dependent on our economy and how people are purchasing things. For the unclaimed assets, it was postponed. So the funds were not taken, they were postponed because those funds were desperately needed to make up for that $3 billion deficit that Elena mentioned. And so we're very thankful that the funds were postponed and not taken entirely. Next slide, please. And so this is where you get to see my interpretation of that. and what that looks like. I apologize for how technical I am in getting these things on paper or on screen, but you can see state fiscal year 20, no distribution of vendor fee, state fiscal year 21, not sure what that distribution will be. In state fiscal year 22, the unclaimed assets, that is going to balance the state budget, but you can see that 3 years is pushed out, and so that full funding is expected over time. I should mention as well, and you see in state fiscal year 22, there's a big jump in the vendor fee. And so although that is subject to the sales tax in the economy, we do fully expect that there will be funds distributed for housing throughout the state. Next slide, please. So another important thing that happened in 2019 was House Bill 1309, which created the Mobile Home Park Oversight Act, where within the Division of Housing, we would then register all mobile home parks throughout the state. And then as of May 1st, we would start taking complaints, concerns from either homeowners or the property owners to try to resolve issues. So since we started, we have been receiving over 100 calls per month on the hotline, and we've had 46 official complaints submitted, and 647 mobile home parks have been registered throughout the state. So we're very pleased with how this work has started. Then with our Strategic Housing Working Group, so last summer when we did this joint effort with Housing Colorado and CHFA, we did the stakeholder engagement and bringing in what people's interests and hopes would be for these additional funds. I should mention how we have actually started to adjust and change some things already based on that feedback. We did have a report that came out. And so a couple of things in particular that I want to highlight. One is the Strategic Housing Working Group. So we had over 50 people apply, which is amazing. We really appreciate this interest and are excited to see this work happening. And the appointments of up to 13 members will be made in the next couple of weeks. And so notifications will be going out to folks here soon. We're really enthusiastic about getting that all started. Another thing that I wanted to highlight that we've done since the strategic or the engagement meetings and the approval of these additional funds is we've started expanding our down payment assistance program throughout the state. And so in January, we had applicants apply because with the legislation of 1322 in particular, which is the Unclaimed Assets Bill, it allowed us to go up to 100% of the area median income based on area or location for down payment assistance, helping people get into homes. And so we were very pleased that we could make awards based on that and based on feedback during our Strategic Housing Working Group or the stakeholder engagement meetings. We were able to make that adjustment as well. But Elena mentioned there's a lot going on. Philip, can you go to the next slide? And we've had to pivot. We are still on course with the Strategic Housing Working Group, but there is so much going on with the pandemic, and the impact on Coloradans is immense. And so you can see all of the different things that have changed people's lives in the last 4 months, 5 months. And so we've had executive orders trying to keep people stably housed. We've had new federal funds through the CARES Act come in. We have CARES Act funds through HUD coming in, all intended to help keep people housed. So this has been a major pivot for the state, for the Division of Housing, and how we're serving people. Philip, can you change the slide, please? And so what we're doing since the start of the pandemic is trying to come up with resources to help people. And so the first thing that we did, and we've had to update every single executive order, we're updating our FAQs, frequently asked questions, to try to provide guidance to people throughout this process. Next slide. Philip, can you also put these links into the chat so that folks can be linked to our website and have these resources available to them? So not only do you have your questions answered through these FAQs on our website, but we also provided a model repayment agreement, because when people are not able to pay their rent, it's still obligated to be paid. It's a contract between the landlord and the renter. And so that's a contractual obligation that needs to be satisfied. And so the model repayment agreement is intended to provide that agreement that satisfies the needs of both the property owner and the renter. So this is another resource on our website. Next slide, please. Now, we've also needed to stand up different programs. The first program that we stood up is the Emergency Housing Assistance Program. And we initially stood this up with Executive Order 12, the state's $3 million of emergency funds. And this is providing rental and mortgage assistance to people that are impacted by COVID-19 and are unable to pay their rent. And so we've partnered with 20 agencies around the state, and we're actually assessing this right now because we're looking to potentially expand this in areas that maybe need additional capacity in order to meet the needs of the residents. This is a huge challenge, and I will get into this more, but we're also looking at creating a centralized application system so that those applications can then be sent out to the local agencies because the volume that this program has received is significant. Next slide, please. So another program that we just started July 15th is the Property Owner Preservation Program. And this is seeded by House Bill 1410. That was $19.6 million of CARES Act funds. The CARES Act funds must be spent, that is, spent, not obligated, but spent by December 30th, 2020. This is not a long time frame. This is a very short time frame. But let me talk to you about the demand for this program. Since July 15th to August 3rd, we received over $2 million worth of requests. That is significant. And might I mention that 200 people called asking for individual assistance that we would then refer to the EHAP program and our partner agencies around the state. 200 people within 2 weeks called for individual assistance to the state, when there are already rental assistance programs operating. The demand is great. Next slide, please. So as we look at what these demands are and trying to figure out how best to support people, we're talking about expanding our housing counseling and our navigation. People desperately need to know, does my property owner need to apply on my behalf? Do I need to apply? How can I stay stably housed? So we are supporting through House Bill 1410 the expansion of that network of housing counseling with Colorado Housing Connects. Next slide, please. So since the pandemic started, we've been keeping track of what our impact is in keeping people stably housed. And since the pandemic, we've served more than 15,000 households and 4,000 households just through emergency programs. This is significant, and it's not possible without our local partners, because that's how we maximize the impact and keep people stably housed and provide during those emergency times. But we're watching what is happening. And so, Philip, can you go to the next slide? This is what keeps me up at night. So this is a dashboard based on the Census Bureau's Pulse survey that it started doing. We don't have the data exactly like this before the pandemic, because the Census Bureau started doing this Pulse survey because everyone is so concerned about keeping people housed. How do we recover the economy? And so they started asking these questions. And the top bar chart talks about whether or not people paid on time. So they may have paid, but did they pay on time? It is the next line chart that is what greatly concerns me. This is where the question is, do you have confidence that you can pay next month's rent? So where are we right now? It's August 4th, or the beginning of August. And so this question in the census is asking, are you going to be able to pay August rent? Because this was in July. 268,000 Coloradans don't know how they're going to pay August rent. This is what keeps me up at night. Next slide. And I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.